Can you tell us a bit about your background and tell us what inspired you to start Little Leaders?
Okay, so I've when I was 18, I had a baby, and I realized that very quickly that find I needed to find a career that was going to be able to encompass motherhood um, and something that was going to inspire me, that was going to be able to give me the the work ethic and the abilities that I needed in order to not only raise my son, but also to be able to generate an income. And I chose teaching, not realizing that teaching wasn't actually going to be able to pay my bills. And I think that a lot of teachers are in the very similar position. The job requirements, the pressure, the work that it takes from teachers is a lot, and the salaries don't necessarily equate. And so I learned really quickly that if I was going to make it, with my qualifications, that I would need to look at buying a school. And I had done a foundation phase. I had started in a foundation phase space, and I was paging paper day, and I saw that there was a preschool for sale. And so I immediately contacted the owners that were looking to immigrate to New Zealand, and I managed to negotiate to buy the school, and that was in May 2005. So we are now almost in our 20th year. Well, we're in our year. May will officially be 20 years of school. And so the inspiration was actually being a young single mom, and realizing that in order to give my son a good life, and possibly a better life than what I had had, that I very quickly needed to translate my skills from teaching. I needed to be able to capitalize on those skills more than what it was just applying for a job and going to work at a school. It was actually being able to buy a school and then capitalize on my skills from a business perspective, and then from a teaching perspective, to be able to give back into my classroom space.
Such a very interesting story. I mean, most people think about, entrepreneurship and they're like, I'm gonna just buy this boat because it's already running. Let me just enter it and see if, I'll get to the other, Pacific, side of the ocean and stuff. So I want to know about the challenges you've experienced along your journey in starting Little Leaders on in developing it in its 20th year in 2025 as of yet, and how did you overcome them?
I think my biggest challenge when I started was lack of mentorship. I bought the school. I had negotiated to buy the school. I actually had to pay it off. I managed to negotiate to actually pay it off. And I walked in as a young woman, and I didn't have enough business mentorship. I didn't have enough people around me that could say, look for this, look for that, be careful of this, be aware of your expenses, make sure that your staff are loyal to you, make sure that they can do what you need them to do, because you can't do everything in your business. Learn to delegate, and learn to trust your delegation, and run your finance as well. At the end of the first year of trading, I had allowed the finances to get away from me, and I I had felt empathy for people that weren't covering their school fees properly. But ultimately, what that meant was that I was the one that ended up picking up that financial burden. And somebody said to me very early on in my business journey, they said to me, you can't be expected to love somebody else's children and be more responsible for somebody else's children than they are willing to be as the parents. And if they can't pay their school fees, you can't keep allowing that little person to come to school every day. And, as a teacher and as a mom, you feel really bad about that. And you think to yourself, oh my gosh, how do I stop somebody from coming to school just because they can't pay? But the reality of the situation is that without school fees, the business doesn't operate, and if you're not running your finances effectively, then you are picking up picking up the pieces for people, and it's obviously not sustainable, especially in the early years of a business. And so we've had to really work hard on making sure that our service delivery equates what our cost expectation is from people that come in and pay our school fees. You can't overpromise and underdeliver. You've got to overdeliver and underpromise. And when people are getting a good service, and when they feel that they are getting value for their money, they will be the first ones at the door lining up to come and pay. And it's also making sure that you run your finances strictly with yourself as the business owner, and making sure that every single month you are meeting your collection targets. Otherwise, you find yourself in very serious trouble, and you find yourself in trouble because your expenses are reoccurring every single month. And so that's a lesson that I learned right in the beginning, was just don't be weak. People cannot take advantage of you because you're a young entrepreneur. There's no such thing as work for free. It's not like, well, you're an artist and somebody approaches you and says, oh, well, if you paint this mural for free, someone's going to see your artwork and then they're going to want you to do more work. And for me, I just feel that, no, my work, my time, my experience holds a value, and that should be respected right from the onset. And in the first year of business, I didn't respect my own skill set enough to be able to implement that hard enough to get people to make payments. You always think to yourself, oh, if I just do this, or if I just give a little bit over here, then I'm going to get more back. But you've actually got to be so resilient in your own skill set as an entrepreneur, and people will pay you for that as long as they're getting a good service.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very interesting story you've just tailored us to, you know, like in most education programs, especially creches and stuff that are just usually known in our environments, which we grew up in. They usually toss these young kids, into these programs, and just they sleep there all day. Like, what sets apart from the other educational programs, Little Leaders?
So first of all, Little Leaders is a fully registered preschool. We are registered across all the departmental requirements. And in line with that, we have got to work with the curriculum that is set out by the Department of Education. And I also think that there's an ethos within our school that determines that we assume competence with every single child that comes through our door. And an educational program has to be holistic. It has to build in elements of the curriculum from an academic perspective, but then it has to be the holistic development of the child. And we can't just only focus on one or two of those elements. We've got to focus holistically on how we develop this young person. And I think what sets us apart is that we are constantly upskilling, we are constantly evolving in terms of how we present curriculum material, how we engage with our children, how we use old methodology and current methodology in order to bring our lessons across in our classroom space. Our teachers are enthusiastic. They work in a dynamic environment. There's a lot of collaboration between the teachers, and again, it comes from the top down. Our management structure at our school is strong, and the lady that works with me in the school, my 2IC, her name is Nicola. She's a very passionate, very driven woman, and she's very responsible for driving our academic syllabus forward and implementation of that syllabus in our classroom space. And I think when we work collectively as a team, we produce a program that not only engages our children from an academic perspective, but it engages their holistic development. And I think when you do that, and you can do it in a fun way and in a way where children can really relate to the person that's teaching them, to the material that they're being exposed to, in an environment that really does cater towards children, you've got a winning formula. And I think that is one of the things that does set Little Leaders apart. Is we've really got a fantastic ethos that comes from the top down and from the bottom up.
Sounds great.
It's a fun place.
It's a fun place. I guess I will go there maybe sooner than later
I think
in
you should.
these coming
I
years,
think you should.
definitely. So, as a leader in this organization in its second decade of operation, how do you identify the key leadership skills that young children should learn, and how do you incorporate them into your programs?
So again, I think it takes it back to how we implement our programs in our classrooms. You know, some people are leaders and other people are followers, and we've got to be able to take both of those two types of personalities and those two types of people, and we've got to be able to blend them into something that works within the classroom environment. And you know, in my workspace, we're dealing with children in the foundation phase, so we're at the very start of their developmental and educational journey. And I think a huge thing for me is lead by example, and that comes down to how do your teachers interact with the children in their classroom space. What are the expectations that those teachers have on their children, and how do they reflect those same expectations on themselves? And that is from the most simple thing to, you know, arriving on time for school and being organized and being neat, right through to the ethos that personality has. You know, do they treat somebody with kindness? Do they treat children with respect? Do they treat children with dignity? Do they speak to the children in a way that is going to elicit a favorable response from little people? Because when we work with children, we have to work with them from a space of leading by example, because that's how children learn. Children are like a sponge, and they're effervescent. And if we don't lead by example, then we can't be surprised when we stand back and have a disaster on our hands. And so, you know, often if you come into our school, you'll see that if a staff member is talking to a child, she'll often be down on her haunches, making eye contact with that little person, not speaking above them. You know, when we walk with children, we hold hands, we don't pull children along by their arms. When we greet each other with out of a space of respect. When we say goodbye to one another, we do the same thing. And children learn all of those leadership skills that set them up for the rest of their lives by example. You know, not every child comes out of a home environment or out of a community environment that leads by those kinds of examples. And the schooling system has changed so much. You know, 25 years ago when I was studying, you know, we were taught how to teach children from an academic perspective. Our job was to take information and transmit that across into somebody else's brain, teach them academic information. School is now so much more. It's about ethics, it's about morals, it's about behaviors, it's about creating a space that is safe for children. It's about creating a space that allows children to be who they are in a very safe environment, and to work through difficult things that they might be experiencing in their home environments or in their communities. And we do that here by leading by example.
How do you handle the pressure of balancing business with also making a social impact and being a family woman? Family woman.
So are you asking me from a personal perspective or from a business perspective? Or both?
Both, both.
So for us, I'll start with our school, and it'll probably end up morphing all into one. But I feel that as any business, I feel that you've got to look at where you can make the most impact, and your income will flow. And balance comes from making sure that your impact is positive. Um, for us at Little Leaders, we can't just be insulated to what works as a business. We've got to look at what is our community around us needing. Where is the community struggling, and then how can we look to support that struggle? Because we're not autonomous, we're not in this on our own, and we've got to look at ways that everybody can be supported from a social perspective. And like I said earlier, so many people come out of so many different environments, and some of those environments are not good environments. They're not good home environments. And we've got to create a space at school that is safe. To balance that takes a lot of emotional commitment. It takes a huge amount of planning, and it takes a lot of emotional commitment, not only from myself, but from all of my staff as well. And I think that balancing that space is to consistently look to be positive. Things are not always easy, and caseloads are not always easy, and environments are not always easy. But if you can find a way of bringing that positivity and inclusion into that space, you find that it will balance itself. Especially if you're working to try and solve a problem in a society. We have to be solutions driven. We can't just be business driven. We can't just be financially driven. We have to be solutions based. If we're not, then I feel a business will fail. When you're looking to just start something for profits, I understand that business has to work for profits, but we've got to shift our mind to solving a problem. So see a need, fill a need, and everything else will balance itself and fall into place after that.
Definitely. Just going back to your part where you were just explaining your difficulties in studying Little Leaders, just want to refresh on a good book that I'll just share with the audience. It's called Tony Robbins, Awakening the Giant Within. So
Brilliant book.
there's a brilliant book, definitely. So he goes on the line when he says, when you succeed, you party. When you fail, you ponder. And in pondering comes greatness. When you think about your life that much, I think the rewiring starts to shift, that those wires, that blue wire just turns into just goes and get inserted into the red wire. I think that's how like entrepreneurs most of the time walk. They don't walk on the straight mile as the rest of the society, right?
Never ever. A friend of mine, and she's a brilliant entrepreneur, and she started. Her name is Darlene Menzies, and she looked at young entrepreneurs, and she looked at small to medium business enterprises, so SMMEs, and she looked to see where they were failing. Why were they failing? Was it funding? Was it motivation? Was it mentorship? Was it environment? Like, what was happening? And she is she's a great businesswoman in a sense, but she often says that an entrepreneur is like somebody that and not everyone is an entrepreneur. I have to just also put that out there. Like, sometimes it's a great idea to have a business, but if you're not, you've got to be entrepreneurial. And she says this often. She says an entrepreneur is the kind of person that jumps off a cliff without a parachute and makes a plan on the way down not to die. And I think that that's a very true representation of an entrepreneur. We're not linear. We are quick thinkers. We're running on our feet all the time. We solutions based. We problem solvers, and we don't allow fear to get in our way of solving something or creating something. We tend to be risk people. We don't always take all of the risks into consideration, and we tend to be like, sometimes I've been described as a bull in a china shop. Don't take no for an answer. Pitbull with jaw lock. And harsh, unrelenting, very difficult to work with. But I take all of those things as a compliment, because I am in my blood. I'm an entrepreneur. And I know that without all of those particular things, none of my business ventures would succeed, and I wouldn't have been able to build Little Leaders into what it is today, which is a multidisciplinary, meaningfully inclusive mainstream preschool. And a preschool that has survived a lot of stuff: South African economy, COVID, rioting in KZN, horrendous weather patterns and flooding, and have managed to establish deep roots in our community to be able to keep our business going. And entrepreneurs are, I think we're a little bit nuts, to be honest.
It's called the hypomanic edge. Hypomanic edge. It's the desire to do so much energy that you have inside of you, just to constantly just keep on doing what you love and trying to make a positive impact. Okay,
I also think, on the other hand, I think, sorry, just to say, on the other hand, I think entrepreneurs, for all of our craziness, I think an entrepreneur is a very disciplined person, because we just don't ever stop. There's this really good work ethic, and entrepreneurs have that. They might have all the other stuff that makes us difficult to work with, but what we do have is incredible work ethics, and that comes from unrelenting discipline. We don't have motivation and then it ends up waning. We've got consistent discipline, and that, I suppose, also makes us difficult to work with, because we just don't ever stop. Something that somebody said to me, and I took this on board because I'm a very competitive person, is they said to me, you don't ever lose. So, traditionally when I was growing up and competing in sports and stuff, there was winners and losers. If you weren't first, you were losing. Like, don't talk to me about second place. You're not winning. But I had to soften a little bit. And what I realized in that is that you're not winning, you're learning. And that helps to offset that feeling of failure or disappointment. So go back, like you said earlier, ponder over it, think on it, and learn. Because if you put yourself in a position to say, well, I'm losing, then you'll give up. But if you put yourself in a position to say, I'm learning, you will go back and you'll ponder and you'll think and you'll rewire your brain and you'll find the solution. And that will give you that unrelenting energy and discipline to be able to fix or grow or pivot, change direction. So we don't lose. We don't win or lose. We win or learn.
Denzel Washington calls it you fail forward. Failing forward. So
correct.
A winner is just a loser that tried once. A winner is just a loser that tried one more time. So
Amen.
Getting back to another question I have is, like, what advice is a successful entrepreneur for the past 2 decades? You've been working on this pathway for so long, so I'm sure you have so many tips and advices and experiences that you have to share to young entrepreneurs who are looking to start a business and focus on social change.
I think my biggest piece of advice would be, look around you and see the need. What is the need in your environment, where you live, how you travel to work, even within a working environment? If you're working for somebody and you feel like that's not something that you want to do with your life, you want to work for yourself, you want to start a business, look around you and see the need, and then make a plan to fill that need, and fill the need better than anybody else. Get there before everybody else. Be the first person there, the last person to leave. Learn to delegate. When you've built a strong team around you, learn to let go and delegate. Recognize people's strengths and let them work within those strengths. As an entrepreneur, you can't do everything for yourself. You can't. It's impossible. There's just not enough hours in the day. And even if you are working 18 hours out of a 24-hour day, in a business, you've got to identify people that are good at what they do and let them do what they're good at. But tracking it back to when you want to start something, see a need and then fill the need. Whether it's goods-based or whether it's service-based, fill the need and fill it better than anybody else can. Even if you're more expensive than somebody else. People don't mind paying for stuff that is good. If a service is good, they will pay for it. Don't undercut yourself just because you're trying to break into the market, but do it better than everybody else.
Thank you. We are using a basic Zoom workplace, so we're running out of time. So I just want you to listen very, so I want you to close the link and then click back again. You know, right? You heard. So we're gonna continue
Cool.
afterwards, right?
Okay,
You
so
heard,
do you want me to exit?
and then come back again, and then click back again in the same link.
Okay, cool.
So
I'll do that
thank
now.
you, thank you. How do you stay motivated and inspired, especially through tough times?
I think how I stay motivated and inspired is through collaboration and with other industry leaders. Constantly looking to upskill my staff, constantly looking to upskill myself. The education space is extremely dynamic and it's constantly changing, and it's exciting. You know, there's exciting changes that are coming, and I think that when we work in collaboration with others, other schools, other entrepreneurs, I think that keeps the excitement and the motivation going. You know, the other thing is when your business is doing well, when your business is successful, it is motivating. And it makes you want to get up in the morning and come and work harder the next day. You know, for me, I don't want to sit back and go, okay, well, it's doing really well, and I'm now going to take, you know, a day here and a day there, and then I'm not going to go into the office, and then I'm going to take a 2-week holiday. It makes me want to work harder to grow it more, to see more results. You know, I'm a very results driven kind of person. And so it when I don't see results, or I feel like we've plateaued in a specific area or space, that gets rid of my skin. And then I think a lot about it, and that motivates me to go, right, how can we change? What can we change? And then it's about speaking to other people. It's other entrepreneurs, and it's other industry leaders that keep you motivated. And that keeps you going through the good times. It pushes you more in the good times, and it sustains you during the tough times.
Sure, definitely. There's another concept I wanted to dive into, like since we just still refreshing my memory in terms of we were talking about the the cycles of entrepreneurs, the way they think. So I recently had an interview with Wendy Lohabe. I'm not sure you're familiar with her. So we're talking about I just told her a concept called, so scientists were doing an experiment in a jar, right? So there were fleas in the jar. So when these fleas, the lid was closed, so they couldn't jump outwards from the jar, outwards from the jar. So so and then the scientists opened the lid right again. So the fleas were trying to jump outside the jar, but they weren't jumping outside the jar because while the lid was open, right? But the crazy part is that when these babies of the fleas were born, they weren't also jumping outside of the jar. So it was the environment that was controlling them. Mental limitations, mental limitations. I guess it's also important to send these concepts to young kids so that they could actually learn these concepts of how the environment shapes your perspective and how you view life, right? So I want to get us to what book has made an impact in your business, perspective on life, and how it affected your secretary, your brain, your amygdala. That's what yeah, definitely they call that. So I wanted to get into the concept, like what book shaped your view on business and life.
You know, I really enjoy reading, and I've read a couple. I've read a couple of books that have have either left a very lasting impact on me, or that I've gone back and I've read and I've reread and I've reread. And, one of them is a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And the concept that is in the book is think about what you're doing, your appearance, how you promote yourself, how you represent yourself. Think about your environment and make something happen out of all of that. And if you had to, the book is on my bookshelf at home. If you had to see it, you would see that the edges are frayed and the spine has been bent over and over and over again. Because even though I've read that book, I think in my 20 years of being in business, I've probably read that book 50 times, and it's such a good anchor, and it's such a good reminder of strategies that are needed as a business. And that was written in 1929. So the strategies that are in that book might have been put together over 100 years ago, but they are still strategies that are applicable today. And that is a really good book that every person should read. And it's a book that is not necessarily only about business. It's a book that's about life.
Definitely. In closing off, what are the future plans and projects that are set for Little Leaders, and how can people or the audience that is just watching today, or a person that might just look by, how can he support the educational program? What's the future plans? What are we expecting in the future for this great organization?
So 3 years ago, we took the decision to become a meaningfully inclusive preschool. So we changed our business strategy from being a mainstream preschool for neurotypical children, and we started to become meaningfully inclusive, which means that we enroll children that have got learning difficulties. We enroll children that have ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder. And just before COVID, I took part. I'm a member of Africa, which is a entrepreneurial developmental platform for women in business throughout the African continent. And we took part in a competition, and we ended up being placed second. And the vision at the time was that we wanted to develop our school into a safe and meaningfully inclusive preschool for children with remedial needs. And we have watched that journey unfold. And we took the prize money that we won from that, and we reinvested all of it back into our school. And we built a really beautiful occupational therapy gym, a speech therapy place. And we've increased our team to bring in industry experts and therapists to be able to broaden our offering at our school. And we are now looking to purchase the property next door to our school to continue on with that inclusive space. So to be able to offer more children a space to come to school that might be on the spectrum, or that might have learning difficulties that are not necessarily able to place in mainstream schools, and to create an inclusive, holistic environment, not just for the children that come to our school, but for their families. Children that are on the spectrum are often viewed as there's something wrong. There's something wrong with that child. But why are they being placed in a school? There are no schools for children that have got autism spectrum disorder, or they're very, very few. And we chose to do our model differently. Instead of separating our children and creating a remedial class, we've actually integrated them into our mainstream classes. Because as I said in the beginning, we always assume competence. And just because a little person has got autism, or they are struggling to learn or struggling to speak, it doesn't mean that they are not processing their environment around them. They might just be doing it slightly differently. And I've looked at so many different business models and so many different educational models when it comes to inclusive education. And the thing that I saw that really hurt me was that children were being separated from one another. The children that were divergent or had autism were being schooled completely separately from mainstream neurotypical children. But children learn from one another, and they need that social interaction. They need that peer-to-peer learning, and they need the opportunity to work together. And the most beautiful thing happened when we took a big gamble, and some of our parents said that they would prefer not to be a part of our school any longer, and they removed their children from our school, which I said, fine, go. We are not going to forsake everybody for the few. And the most beautiful thing happened to our school is that our neurotypical children just embraced our autistic children with the utmost of respect and love and dignity and understanding. And our autistic children learned so many valuable skills from our neurotypical mainstream, because they are in the same classroom environment. And with our therapists, we've got an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and a play therapist. We work very closely with an educational psychologist. With that underlying support, we've seen this beautiful symbiotic relationship develop between our neurodivergent children and our neurotypical children. The other beautiful thing that happened was that parents of autistic children who had often felt so alienated, so lost, so alone, so misunderstood, were suddenly being embraced by a school community that was inclusive. And they were being invited to birthday parties, and they were being invited to school functions, things that they had never experienced before because they had always been excluded from these kinds of things. And our neurotypical parents, our normal parents, for want of a better description, were embracing these parents that are just two normal people that fell in love and they had a baby and their child is autistic. And so we've seen this incredible development, this effervescent development that has been happening in our school environment, and it's given us so many opportunities. We're going to develop the property next door to continue on that journey. We've been asked to assist with a very big school development in Morningside to replicate the same ideology and ethos that we have at Little Leaders into that school environment there. And we've had the Department of Education come in and chat to us because our model is different, but it's working. It's working, and it's not only working in the classroom, but it's also working for families, and it's working outside of the classroom space. And so for us, that is our goal, is to develop the property next door to be able to continue on offering the services that we do in order to grow the age of the children that we work with, so that people don't have to go through the stress of needing to find another educational space. And then consistently working with other schools in our area, entrepreneurs, to encourage them to be brave, to take the step to do the same thing that we have. Don't separate your children, upskill your staff, give them the right support that they need to do their jobs in the classroom space, and have your children all together and carousel them out for therapy instead of separating everybody and having this disconnect in the school environment and in the classroom space. So our vision and our goal is to continue on with what we're doing now. It's to purchase the property next door, develop that space into what we've developed here at Little Leaders, develop the space in Morningside that we've got the opportunity to work with fantastic industry leaders on that side of Durban, and then hopefully be able to replicate the model and offer it for free. I think that in this kind of situation, we've got to be supporting one another for the bigger picture. And so our business model is successful because we saw a need and we filled it. And we don't overcharge our parents for it. And we want to be able to continue on doing that for as long as we possibly can. So that, if I had to wrap it up in a nutshell, it's replicating what Little Leaders does in all different educational centers, irrespective of what the LSM of that community is. So it doesn't matter if it's a low income community or a high income community. It's taking the model and it's replicating it because it works not only for the business, which is very important, but it works for the society. It works for the social impact that it is needing, because it's not only supporting the children in the environment, but it's giving their families an opportunity outside of their environment. And I think that that's a very beautiful process to be able to witness.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful initiative. I mean, congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations on your success, man. It's a beautiful story. And yeah, we'll hope also as Life for the Page to actually try to upgrade as time progresses, try to make these stories come to other, environments, to make this thing work out. Yeah, I think we're closing off here. Thank you, Sarah Morrow. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for the time. It was a pleasure to be. We're always available. So come pop down, come have a cup of tea, and come and see how the school works. Just another book. Just in saying that, there was a book that I read years ago, and it's a brilliant book. And in fact, if you come and visit me at school, I'll make sure that it's here for you. It's by a guy called Greg Mortensen, and it's called 3 Cups of Tea. And he started off as a paramedic working in Ireland, and he ultimately ended up doing a huge amount of work in Afghanistan during the war. And his goal there was to get girls to be educated, because in Afghanistan at the time that he was trying to work in the area that he was working in, girls were not allowed to go to school. And he was approaching all the imams to say, please, can we educate the girls? Because if we can elevate the literacy rate in your country, we can decrease the mortality rate, the child mortality rate. They are intrinsically linked. If we teach people how to read, and read with meaning, it's so simple, like reading the back of a medicine box and not poisoning their child with medicine, or being able to read the expiry date on food and knowing not to cook that food. And he was begging, he was saying, please, can we just, women are childbearing, they have lots of babies, but they're illiterate and they don't know how to read, and we've got to change this. And he wrote this book called 3 Cups of Tea. And I think everything starts with collaboration, and it starts over a cup of tea. So I'd like to invite you to come have a cup of tea with me at school and come and see how our program works and what we do here, and then see how that could be replicated, not only in what you're trying to achieve with Life by Design through your podcast that other young aspiring entrepreneurs can listen to, but to build the platform in such a way that it actually genuinely gives back to where the needs are,